The machine is all set up, and the instructions on number 1 say to stitch the placement line directly onto the stabilizer. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm actually using white thread, which is going to be a little bit hard to see because I also have white stabilizer. But that's okay. We'll let that stitch. After that finishes stitching, then step 2 says to place the batting or the Insulbright. In this case, I'm using Insulbright because I am going to use it as a hot pad, and lay that so that it completely covers the placement line underneath, and then go ahead and push the button, or push the start button, and it will outline exactly where it did, plus it will make the little rectangle shapes on each side so you know where to place the fabric. I have my machine stitching at 500 stitches per minute, and I am going to turn it up just a little bit to 600 stitches a minute. On this particular machine, which is the Janome MC12000, you can control the speed by the button up here, which you can with your foot control too when you're doing regular sewing. Hopefully you can see that all right. The machine is kind of vibrating the desk a little bit because I have it at an angle. And the camera is shaking. Now it says on step number 6, which is actually step number 3 on the machine, it says to stitch the trimming placement line. Oh, no, that's not the right one. So it says lay the background piece right side up, right over the center, this center square right here. Obviously, I should have used a different color thread so it was a little easier for you to see. Okay, I didn't realize that I had the camera on reverse, so it was actually filming my ceiling. So I did do a couple steps, but I'm going to back up and show you what I did. So just disregard this piece of fabric on here right now. So step number 1, the very first step on the machine is going to sew a square, and that's going to be the placement line for either your batting or your Insulbright. So in this case, I used Insulbright. So after my square sewed, and then I went to step number 2, step number 2 says to, which is actually step number 2 on the machine, but step number 3 in the PDF instructions. It says to lay it on there and then push the next, push your start button, and it's going to sew all the way around, and it's going to sew a square in the middle, and then it's going to sew these little rectangles on the edges, and that's the placement line for the border. So I went ahead and did that, and that's step number 6 on the instructions, or that's step number 5 on the instructions. Then step number 6 says to place the piece of fabric, your background fabric, which I did, and then stitch the next step, which is step number 3 on the machine, and it's going to stitch a line across the top, and that will be the placement line for that piece number 2. So after you do that and the machine stops, then you're going to trim close to the stitching line, and that will be step number 7 on the instructions. Then we're going to go to step number 8 on the instructions, and it says to lay your fabric right side down. So here's my right side. So right side down up against the top of that placement line. So after you've done that, then you're going to stitch step number 4. I just have to make sure I'm on step number 4. I am running my machine at 600 stitches per minute. Usually I run it around 600. I very rarely ever run it faster than that. It doesn't really make it much faster. So then I'm going to finger press that up, that piece I just stitched down, and then step number 5 on the machine will sew a line across the bottom of that center piece of fabric. Then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take another piece of border fabric. You could trim that. I'm sure it says to trim it. Actually, it does not. But it doesn't leave a very big seam. So then I'm going to place my next piece of fabric, border fabric, on the bottom. And then I'm going to stitch step number 6 on the machine. So after you stitch that bottom line and fold it down to the right side, then I took, behind me here I have one of these mini irons, and I brought the hoop forward and I pressed both of those seams so that they would lay nice and flat. Otherwise, I suppose you probably could tape them. So this is piece number 2 up here, and this is piece number 3 down here. So now you should be on step 7 on the machine, color number 7, although keep the same color in the, I'm using white thread actually throughout the project. So now it's going to stitch the placement line for piece number 4 over here on the left side. You're going to lay your next piece of fabric, which is fabric border number 4, on top of that, right side down, and then stitch step number 8 on the machine. Then I'm actually going to stitch this side too, and then I will trim this side and this side both at the same time. So step number 9 on the machine, we'll stitch this right side. Wow, I just got that piece of fabric in there far enough, if you can see that. So make sure you center yours a little better. So after that, stitches, lay your last piece of border fabric right side down and stitch the next step, which would be step number 10 on the machine. And that will come, I said I was real close, but this stitch comes in a little farther, so it kind of covers that. So now I'm going to stop it for a minute, and I'm going to trim this edge and this edge, and then I'm going to press them open, and then I'll be back. Now we're on step number 14 of the instructions, but actually step number 11 on the machine. So you can see I pressed all the border pieces to the outside, and I also trimmed a little more than 1/4 inch. I left seam there, and then I pressed them. So now I'm going to put it back in the machine, and I'm going to stitch the next step, which will tack the whole border pieces to the centerpiece. This is step number 11 on the machine. Mine is pushing a little bit, so if yours does that, stop your machine and tape it or spray it. Mine, it's not too bad, so I'm just going to leave it. Step number 12 on the machine is going to do the quilting. It'll do the whole top piece, and then you're going to do the applique. I'm doing an apple, so I'm going to do my apple on top of that. So I've decided that I wanted to keep my white thread in there up against the gray fabric because I don't want the background to show so much. In other words, I don't want to put red on there. So I will start step number 12, and I will let it finish. It'll go back and forth. It'll probably take about 3 minutes. So it just finished doing the quilting, and now we're going to go on to applique, in my case, the apple. And I'm going to jump over to the instructions, the PDF instructions, and explain that a little bit so you understand how to do each one of the... The PDF instructions start out by telling you the cutting instructions for all the different pieces in all the different sizes. Each different fruit is cut the same dimensions. So, in other words, I'm going to do a large apple, and you'll see on the screen in front of me the sizes. Now, if I was going to do the pear or the peach or any of the other ones, I would still use these cutting instructions. Then if I scroll down, see if I can do this with one hand. As you scroll down, you see the different fruits, and then it gives you, like here, for the large one, the dimensions for the actual red part of the apple, and then the leaf sizes. And then if I scroll down a little bit more, it actually starts with the stitching instructions. And someplace down here, there's special instructions for the pineapple and the, there it is, for the pineapple and the peach. The peach has 2 different sections, so I would suggest that you read over all the instructions before you actually start to sew. And then the pineapple chenille stitches has like a diamond brick, and so that's the blue lines that you see there. That's the cutting instructions for when you go to cut it before you chenille it. Once you finish step number 15 on the instructions, you will see right below that where it says below are step-by-step instructions on how to applique a piece of fabric to your project. And then you will notice if you scroll down that each different fruit, let me see if I can scroll down here with one hand, it shows the picture of the pear, but if you're not making the pear, you need to continue to scroll down and read the instructions. That is step by step on how you would lay your pieces of fabric. But like I said, if you scroll down for which particular fruit you're making, and in this case I'm making the apple, and so it tells me the first thing to stitch on the apple is I'm going to place the fabric, and then it's going to tack that fabric down, and then I'm going to trim the fabric. So pay attention to which fruit you're making and continue to scroll down on the instructions until you find the instructions for that particular piece of fruit. So the next step on my apple is step number 13 on the machine, and it shows the outline of the apple. And I'm actually going to change my thread to the red thread so that I can see it a little bit better. Very first step of actually all of the fruits will be the placement line. You won't place any pieces of fabric on here yet. You're just going to stitch the placement line directly onto the quilted background piece. And now step number 14 of my instructions on the apple say to lay down a piece of fabric. So you're just going to lay down one piece of fabric. You can also look at the instructions up above where they show the pair. After that finished stitching, take the hoop out of the machine and trim as close to the placement line as you can get. And as you can see, I forgot to mention that the fabric was placed right side up, and you only used one of your, you would have cut 4 pieces of fabric for your applique, and the very first one that is laid on the background piece is just 1 piece of fabric. The other 3 pieces that you're going to chenille will be laid on there at a later time. So let me finish trimming this. Not very handy here. I should have laid it down on the desk. Trim just a little bit more right here. Like I said, get as close as you can without cutting into those stitches. And you can see I've got pretty close. So I'm going to put the hoop back in the machine. And then I'm going to stitch the next step on the apple, which is step number 15, and it happens to be the leaf. So I'm going to stop the camera for a minute, and I'm going to put the green thread on. I have my green thread on, and now I'm going to stitch number 15 on the machine, and it will be the placement line for the leaf of the apple. Again, if you're doing a different piece of fruit, then pay attention to what the instructions for that piece of fruit call for. Now I'm going to lay the leaf fabric. I'm going to spray it just a little bit. You lay the leaf fabric right side up. All these pieces of fabric go right side up because you're going to stitch around it and then you're going to trim. Okay, that's stuck down. And if you don't have any spray, you can use your tape. Go ahead, start the machine, and it will tack that leaf fabric in place. Now that's finished stitching. I'm going to stop the camera for a minute, and I'm going to trim around it. I've changed my thread to, I trimmed around the leaf first, then I changed my thread to brown, because step number 17 on the apple happens to be the stem of the apple. I am leaving the bobbin thread white because that won't show. There's a backing that goes on the back of the hot pad, so all these stitches are inside of that area that will be enclosed, so it's not going to show. When the stem finishes, then I'm going to change my color back to red, and it's going to do a decorative outline around the apple, because when you put your other fabrics on top and you cut in between for the chenille, this particular piece on the bottom is not cut. I'll let you watch it here for a little bit. You can see it's doing that fancy stitch around the edge of the red, and when that finishes, then it's going to do a decorative stitch around the green leaf. There's just a couple minutes left, actually probably only about a minute left on the decorative stitch around the apple. I'm going to trim those little pieces of thread there. I didn't get it quite close enough when I trimmed the outline of the apple after I put that first layer of fabric on. So the whole decorative stitch on the outside of the apple took about 4 minutes. So now that's done. I'm going to shut the camera off, and then I'm going to put the green thread on, and it's going to do the green around the outside of the leaf. I'll let you watch the stitching around the outside of the leaf. Pull my light out and start the machine. It's going to do exactly the same decorative stitch that it did around the outside of the apple. This one probably only take a couple minutes. It's not very big. Of my rest of my pieces of fabric laid all of them right side up, and then I will put it on top of the whole outline of the apple and stitch all 3 of these together onto the apple. But first I need to trim that little bit right there. I changed my thread back to red, and I put all 3 of my pieces of fabric, one on top of the other, right side up, and I decided to tape a little bit on 3 sides to hold it in place while it does the chenille lines, is what it's going to do next. I'm actually on step 20 on the machine, and there's only one step after that. So I will go ahead and start it. Let you watch it for just a couple minutes. What it's going to do is it's going to do a sequence of straight lines diagonally across the apple. And that will be the lines where I will cut in between to create the chenille effect. So it probably is best that you tape it here so that these layers of fabric don't shift. It starts sewing at the top, so it's not really necessary to tape the top, but I would tape a couple inch piece of tape all the way on the other 3 sides. So I'll let that finish and I'll be back. It finished stitching the lines all the way across for the where I trim in between for the chenille, and then it also stitched a basting stitch, you can see, around the whole outside edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim as close as I can get to this basting stitch. I'm going to trim all 3 of these layers of fabric away. Then I'm going to actually remove that basting stitch. I'll restart the video and you can watch me trim here. I'm trimming through all 3 layers as close as I can get to that basting stitch. And it's not quite as important this time if you happen to clip into that basting stitch just a little bit, because you're actually going to remove that basting stitch. And you can see once I trim these pieces of fabric, you can see my border stitch, my decorative border stitch that we did around the very first layer of fabric that we put down. I probably could use my duckbill scissors too, but these gingers are nice and sharp. So there, I've trimmed all the way around. Get it so you can see it. And now my tiny little basting stitches, I'm just going to clip like every other one and then pull it up with the tip of my scissors just to remove that basting stitch and release that fabric that's around the edge. And I will finish that and then I'll be back. I removed the basting stitch all the way around. I'm going to take my chenille cutter, which is basically just a small rotary cutter. You can see it is about the width. There's different frames that you can put on this. And you just bring the blade forward like that and lock it into place. And then you run. That goes, rides right down the middle of that seam where we just stitched those lines. Now, if you don't have a chenille cutter, you can use a pair of scissors. And you can see it's cutting through the 3 layers of fabric, but it's not cutting through that very first layer that we did. Oops. So I'll trim between each one of those. I don't know why those first 2 rows wanted to get stuck a little bit, because it's actually sliding through there nice and easy now. If I didn't have the basting. No, that was in the middle. Okay, now what you do is you just take, I have a couple of different chenille brushes here, or the instructions show you can take a fingernail file, and you're just going to chenille it until it's nice and fluffy. So I won't let you watch me do that. Actually, the yellow brush is stiffer. And you just pull all these little threads. It brings all these little threads up, and then I'm going to trim them. And when I get it all chenilled, I will come back and I'll show you how to put the back on it. Okay, as you can see, I gave my apple a pretty good haircut. I don't know if it makes a difference how you lay the fabric on there or not. If you maybe should kind of lay it on the bias. These strands of strings were pretty long. I don't know if I laid it lengthwise of the fabric or what, but I don't remember when I made all my other samples having to trim quite as much off as I did. So I trimmed, and then I used a lint roller, and then when I get all done, I will trim a few more of these long ones away. But I wanted to show you the very last step. On the apple, it's step number 21 on the machine, but if you're doing a different fruit, it might be a different step. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the back pieces, which are on the large, I believe I had cut them to 10 by 10, and then you fold them in half. And you're going to lay them up against the edges. They're going to overlap quite a bit. And then I'm going to tape it all the way across the center here to hold this center seam down. And I just remembered I want to put a corner ribbon in there. So I need to, on this top corner, I cut a 3/8" piece of grosgrain ribbon, because I want to loop. So if I want to hang it. In the instructions, they show where they cross it over like this. I don't want it like that. I want mine one right on top of the other. So I'm going to lay that on there, and then I'm going to put a piece of tape. And this Kimberbell tape, you can sew through it, and it doesn't gum up your needle. Okay, now I'll put that back over that. And then I'll put a little piece of tape at the top and the bottom, and then I actually think I'm going to tape it a little bit on each side, especially where the seam is here. I don't want my foot to get caught on it. My foot on this machine is adjustable. Not on everybody's height-wise is it adjustable. But I am going to slow it down, and then I'm going to sit here and watch it. Okay, I'm going to put it back in the machine, adjust the camera, and then I'll be back. I will stitch the last color. I did switch back to the white, and it's going to outline the whole project. Like I said, I do believe I'm going to slow it down a little bit. I do have that seam where they meet. I have it taped, so it should be okay. It shouldn't get hung up on the foot. Wow, I could have brought that down a little bit farther. It did catch it though. It's hard for me to see. I'm sitting actually beside the machine, not in front of the machine, because of the angle of the camera and because the arm comes off the back of this machine. I can't stick it in the corner of my desk there. So it looks like it's going to go around twice, and when it's done, I'll come back. You can see it stitched all the way around twice, and like I said, this one I got up here quite a ways, and this one I just barely caught. So make sure you get that centered. I did take the tape off, and that tape can be removed or reused. So I'm going to pop this out of the hoop. Then I'm going to take my scissors and trim, leaving at least 1/4 inch there. And on this side, that's about all there is 1/4 inch. You can trim the corners at a diagonal. Then I'm going to turn it to the right side and press it, and then I'll come back. Here's the finished product. You can see I got that on crooked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that a little bit, put it in the corner. I'll stitch it on my regular sewing machine. I'm going to turn it back the inside out, put it in the corner so that it goes up where it belongs. Then here I did press, I'll press a little bit better, and then I'm going to put a double-sided piece of heat and bond to close this completely up, but I don't want to do it right now because I need to straighten that. Then what I'll do here is I'll brush this up even a little bit more, and then I do have a few long pieces on there. I like to use my duckbill scissors, and I'll go ahead and trim those long ones off. Keep fluffing it up until I have all the long ones gone. Use a tape roller, a lint roller, and it will be all done. I switched the machine over to regular stitching, and you can see I did take the little loop off, although I still didn't get it on there exactly straight, but it's better than it was before. And then I put, oops, I guess I need to get some new tape in my lint roller here. I put this heat and bond strip in between here to keep that shut. And then I did fluff up the chenille a little bit more, and I still have a few long ones on there. You can see them right there. So I will continue to trim those a little bit until they're pretty much all the same length. And it's all done.